So here, education, jobs, and our future. This is a tough one. Technology is changing so fast that knowing what to do about our students' future is hard. Today's technology, tomorrow, can track our faces, our pupils. It can tell where we're looking. Advertisements in a decade are going to know what facial expression you show when they change the ad on the computer screen or the television. That means computers are going to have a kind of power that's hard to imagine. And it's not just computers that have power, it's that our identity as humans is a little bit in threat. This is my friend Ishiguro in Japan with his robot. This is not a Photoshop, this is a real working robot today. Robots will look like us. They will act like us. It'll be hard to distinguish and differentiate, are we talking to robots or people? And it's not just that identity will become questioned because robots look like us, it's also that we will become ourselves human and robot hybrids. This is an outstanding project at the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon on targeted muscle innervation, where this gentleman who does not have 2 arms has 2 arms now. But those arms have microprocessors, they have robots in them. And they do some of the tasks for him. So it's him and the robots together collaborating to be a single human body. That's the future that we face, a future in which technology changes our sense of personal identity. And in the middle of all this, you can ask the question, how will technology change the jobs we get? So I'm going to go to a really conventional world, the industrial automation plant. It's a nice place as an example to start you off. When you ask the CEO of ADEPT, the old CEO, John Delginos, about people's jobs and what happens to people when robots can do more and more of what humans do, here's his answer. Well, more jobs are lost to overseas markets than the robots, so don't worry about the robots. That's just a distraction. Second answer, robots are generally suited to positions for robots. People should just use their minds. Will that work? Are we going to have all jobs be done by robots that don't involve the mind and have people simply use their minds? Are there enough jobs there for us all in this room to just use our minds and nothing else? There is a short answer to that question. The answer is no. Just to give you a sense of where automation takes us and what's going to happen, I have a cartoon and then a couple of graphs. Then we'll dive into my recommendations. What robots do to society, and the way we need to start thinking about robotics and automation, is that they change the dynamics of employment. They change the kind of income generated by productivity from labor to capital. Because robots are capital, they're owned by companies, but they do what people used to do. Fewer people do that job, and instead, the companies do what the people used to do. But the robots are owned by the same corporate owner. They're not democratic. They're not the many workers in the company. And so they're a pump from labor income to capital income. One last lesson about this slide, and I'll move on. We have a lot of inequality in our world, and that's a problem. But the amount of inequality we have in labor and labor income is actually small compared to the amount of inequality we have on the capital side. So as robots pump resources from labor to capital, they also massively increase inequality in the world. And which are the jobs that are getting pumped away? What are the jobs being replaced? What McAfee and Brynjolfsson at MIT say is routine mental activity and routine physical activity. It's not just your body, it's your mind. Robots have become so good at this. There was an NPR story a couple of mornings ago, some of you may have heard, about Denny's financial report being written by a robot faster than by a human. And that financial reporter writes 1 billion news articles a year. 1 billion. So how many journalists lose their jobs when 1 billion articles are written by a single piece of software? Just a few graphs to hone this for you, and we'll go on. If we look at GDP, the country's doing great. This is the US as a whole. Median income, not so hot. We're flatlining. What does that mean? Where's the money going? Well, what's going on, if you look at the top right corner, is productivity is exploding. We're doing a fantastic job making more with less work. But private employment is flatlining. Last graph for you. It used to be that if you looked at all of the wealth created in the country, more than half of it was actually wage share. It was going into the pockets of people, the middle class. But it's flip-flopped now for the first time actually in history, in recorded history. More of the profits are corporate profit share, and less than that is wage share. So money is moving in different ways than it used to. Now that I've thoroughly depressed you, we can ask the question, what do we do about this? And how can robots actually help rather than hinder? I forgot I have one more great example for you. Sorry. Hyundai China. China is always an interesting one. So Hyundai has a new program. And this is the guy who runs it, the Minister of Economics. And the program is called Replacing Humans with Robots. That's the project of the Minister of Economics for the province of Shunde in China. And the goal is to reduce the number of employees in the entire province by half by replacing them with robots. So they have tax incentives. They actually give you land grants and tax deductions if you bring automation into your company instead of humans. And why do they do this? Because he says, current migrant workers, these are people from other parts of China, they don't have the endurance and hardworking spirits of the older generations. So it's best if we just replace them with robots. I hope this is edgy enough for you to give you a sense of urgency. Now, the rest of my talk is about the three ways in which I think we can fight this, in which technology and education can combine to create an outstanding value proposition for business. Those three are narrative, citizen sensing, and data fluency. I'll talk about each of them in turn with a short example. But these are ways in which technology changes who our children are and creates of them people who can invent the future in a way that is not replaceable by robots, and I find that really important. First, let me talk about narrative. Gail's speech was outstanding. It's a very hard act to follow, actually. And she mentioned STEM. And one of the big challenges that I face in my life in general is people's lack of understanding, in many cases, in the parent groups, that you have to make your child understand STEM, but you also have to make them understand the humanities, because they need to be compelling and convincing. They have to be outstanding communicators. And STEM doesn't teach them that, it's the humanities that teaches them that. And that's incredibly important. A couple of quick examples for you. Hear Me is a project from the Create Lab, where we have thousands of children all the way from here through to Philadelphia, exploring stories about challenges and hardships they face in school today. Youth police relations, nutritional food justice, group punishment in schools. They create stories about that, program them onto cans and kiosks that end up in restaurants all over, even in the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. So they're learning robotics in service of a mission. They're making a physical storytelling robot with their voice on it to convince people to care about children's education. That is powerful narrative. They're learning from a rhetorician at Carnegie Mellon how to tell a story in a compelling manner. That story is what gives them the power to realize they have a voice that matters. It lets a Jamal realize that I can record a story, 10,000 people will listen to it, and I can have impact on the world. And you can't do that by making up stories. They're real stories about your real life. Another example, Arts and Bots, which we've been very happy to deploy throughout West Virginia. In this case, you teach children how to build robots, not in technology class, but in poetry class. You read a poem, and then you make a sculptural robot that represents the poem. Why? Because then every child, not just the ones who are going to have selection bias and sign up for the technology class, the ones who love poetry build a robot. And they learn that they can use technology as a soundstage to express their interest and their sentiment. I have a quick video about that one.
Here we go creative in London in masquerading.
In this room you see some of our 7th graders. They are making a robot theater where poetry comes to life. They get a poem and they must make a roboticized diorama to bring the poem to life.
We're probably gonna have like Daddy standing somewhere around here, and we'll have a motor with like a popsicle stick or something to knock him over so he falls into the pond. And we're trying to make a spinner.
Poetry can be challenging for a lot of kids. They don't like it, they don't understand it, and so I thought this might be a way to make it more fun. How do you understand a poem? It's the repetition of the reading of the poem that helps you understand it. So when you build something, you have to really think about it. They may glean some more meaning from it.
On the last day of October, when dusk is falling,
This is a way to be creative with technology.
No, please stop. You can combine technology with disciplinary learning. We have history teachers, physical education teachers, anatomy teachers, and poetry teachers, English teachers, using robotics in their classroom. The kids become robotically fluent, but they learn to use robots in context of something they care about. That's the kind of education that I believe we have to push for. That's about narrative, and our kids need to have fantastic training in narrative today because robots can't do that, and because that's what's going to cause them to change the future. The second one is citizen sensing. One of the things robot technology gives us is the ability to sense the world in ways we never dreamt of 20 years ago. We can cheaply measure air quality water quality. We can cheaply measure over the internet behavioral analytics on people, on where disease is cropping up from the kinds of medicines people buy at the local Rite Aid store. That ability to be fluent around data, to understand how you can sense the world and then create a story that's powerful, narrative around that, that turns out to be a very important way for children to get a leg up on the future. And I have two quick examples for you. One is air pollution. That's actually a picture of Beijing on a normal day. Yes, it looks like that. That's Pittsburgh on a day that we would like Pittsburgh to look like this. This only happens about 1/5 of the time in Pittsburgh. We have 240 hazardous days a year. This exact same shot from the top of a skyscraper looks like this. 240 days a year in Pittsburgh. That's arrhythmia, asthma, ADHD, autism, and shrinking brain size. All of those are now statistically correlated to this, to air pollution. And it's not everywhere homogeneously. That's the really frightening part. It's not like you can say that this city has good air or bad air. This is an air quality map that we developed at Carnegie Mellon, showing you what, by street, where the air is good and bad. The differences are 50x. Some streets are 50 times cleaner than other streets a couple of blocks away. So we have inequity. By the way, if you overlay this with wealth, what you'll find is really depressing, right? There's a perfect correlation between house price and air pollution. But we have a problem that's highly variegated. We have a federal censor for the city of Pittsburgh, which doesn't tell us neighborhood by neighborhood what's going on. But students, children can solve that problem. We invented a device called the spec sensor here in the bottom left corner. It allows anybody to measure air quality very cheaply. We made actually 300 of them so far. We're making a few thousand more now. We sent them to a school in Utah, and this is a story about citizen sensing for you. Here's what the school did. They took these and put them in the classrooms facing the driveway where parents pick up the children at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they measured the air quality in those classrooms. These are middle school students. Then these middle school students counted how many cars are idling, how many parents idle at 3 o'clock. Then they together researched the hazards of idling and air pollution, and then created a communication campaign, and then went home and had a family meeting with their families. So the kid comes in middle school and says, "Mom, Dad, we have to have a meeting." And they met and talked about air pollution and trained their parents on not idling their cars. Then they waited two weeks, measured the air quality again in the classrooms, and counted how many cars are idling. And then a student researcher came in from the University of Utah, taught the middle school students how to do p-tests and identify statistical correlation. And they identified statistically significant correlation between idling, air pollution in the classrooms across from the driveway. So these kids learned math. They learned about statistical correlation techniques. They learned to do a communication campaign with their parents. They learned about the biology and anatomy and the biophysics of air pollution and the fluid dynamics of how air particles move throughout interior and exterior spaces. And they learned to use a technology artifact. That is learning. And that's learning in a powerful, rhetorically compelling sense, where you're improving your own environment and learning about technology at the same time. So, the last one I want to give you is data fluency, and I want to leave some time for discussions and Q&A. One of the other interesting aspects of the world we live in is that we have massive amounts of data, more data than we know how to handle, explore, and make sense of. And more data is coming online. All of US Census is now available, all 50 dimensions for all time. It's remarkable. Paris School of Economics, you can look at tax rates and tax bases across every country in the world since all recorded history, where you have tax rates on different countries. And some, like Switzerland, have had it since 1500, 1400, so remarkable amounts of tax information. It's not just tax. Environmental information, social information, ecological information, it's all available and out there. The data-fluent generations are going to be the winners. When children learn to take 1 billion or 1 trillion data points and make sense of them, tell a story with them, and show need in the world through those stories, they're the ones who are going to be able to handle what we call big data. So collecting big data is not the problem anymore. It's making sense of big data. And we have to start young. To do that, we have to start at early childhood and show people what electricity is, what data means, what electronics are about. Children's Innovation Project is a lovely story in which we take wooden blocks with discrete electronic components, and we don't tell the 3-year-old how it works. Instead, we simply ask open-ended questions for a year. A year. It's called a slow learning example. Over the course of the year, the children develop a language for these electronic devices. By the end of the year, you can give them a Goodwill toy, they can take it apart, name all the components, they can rewire it together and make a completely new toy. So to them, electronics, data, is no longer a black box. It's no longer shrink-wrapped. It's something that's open to exploration and remixing and reuse. That's the mentality we need our children to have. Downloading an app on an iPad and using it doesn't give you that mentality, because it's a walled garden with no screw holes and with apps that you only have to use as prescribed. Instead, we need systems that you can change, that you can reuse. So we have many products in the Create Lab that do this. I just want to point out one, and then I want to stop, called Explorables. Explorables is a website that any teacher can use today. We have teachers already starting to use it in the Pittsburgh area, and we'll be spreading it out to West Virginia. On this site, kids can literally interact with billions of pieces of information. They can look at all US Census data ever. They can look at every fire at night shown across the entire United States, across the entire world. And that's a really kind of an interesting one. Maybe I'll run one for you, just so you get a sense of the magnitude of information we have available. The internet may be too slow for this here, but I'll give it a shot. We have a satellite orbiting the Earth with NASA, shows every single fire ever burned on Earth's surface, and the temperature of it. And then by viewing that, you can see where agricultural is done, where seasonality occurs through agriculture. There you go. And you can also see where there is industrial activity, both in the oceans and on land. So you can do things like go into 100 million fire points in Madagascar and start to get a sense of how Madagascar fires are used agriculturally. And same thing with Africa. So we have many, many products that are big data exploration products online. Those are tools that children can use in history class, in sociology class, in economics class, to study changes across the planet, and then to use those studied changes to create presentations that in turn use billions of points of data. So that is an example of data fluency. It's going to be a big deal in our world. And one final slide. The way to invent all of these tools for the world is indeed to engage with business. We engage with Google and Microsoft and Intel, but at the same time, a lot of the seed funding comes from foundations like these, because foundations have the foresight to always have shared value with what's happening in schools, always. And so we start with foundations, we do pilot projects, then we go to corporations and say, look, it's clear that children benefit from this, but that the very same technology that children are using, you can use it for corporate gain. So then they fund us to scale it up massively. And that duality between shared value, foundations, and corporations, I believe that's the key to success. So I will stop, and I'm going to go back to this slide so we have those three words on the screen. Thank you.